Hello! Happy Tuesday! It's been a week since I recorded one of these PEP Talks. This is the 29th one, if you're keeping track, I believe. So we're almost to 30, which is cool. And I got about a 20-minute drive to my grandparents' house. Although I'm stopping first to pick them up cheesesteaks, because I'm visiting, and when you visit, you bring food. That's how it is in my family. Or they serve you food. It really depends. But my grandmother's baking me a cake, which she intended to do for Christmas, but things were busy. And I was trying to pick her up a cheesesteak from a local Towson restaurant that is particularly good, from what I've heard. But they were closed due to a family emergency. And I just want to let you know that family comes first over food. And in this case, family and food are coming together. So, I just found it a little ironic. I sure hope that the emergency is not too, I was going to say emergent, not too problematic, whatever it is. Alright, but today, I got about 20 minutes till I get there, and I'm pretty tired, so I was trying to figure out what should I talk about. Well, let's talk about something very near and dear to my heart. The internal combustion engine. That's literally the thought that popped in my head. Although I might expand this to other engines, but I want to mainly focus on internal combustion engines. I don't really have a good reason for why I want to talk about this, but I do know a good bit, because there used to be a joke when I was in middle school and high school amongst my friends that I would one day revolutionize the internal combustion engine. And that kind of all started when I was in science class one day and I had some free time. And I just had nothing better to do. So I started doodling. And I happened to draw an engine, like a diagram of an engine. And that's how it started. But I actually know how engines work, which is cool. Come from a long line of car guys. I myself am not the biggest car guy, but I know the mechanics, I know how they work, and I know mechanics, people mechanics, as well as if I had to fix one, I probably could with the right tools. It's just a matter of, having book knowledge, but not tacit, hand knowledge. But anyway, so here's the book knowledge. Here's how internal combustion engines work. Internal combustion engines and how they work. So, where to start? Let's start with an explosion. We can do that. We can do the fun part. Starts with an explosion. Okay. Let's talk about more so how we use them, and then I'll explain how they work. So, internal combustion engines take a linear force, a linear lateral chemical reaction force, and transfer it into a rotary mechanical energy with leverage and torque. And that is the concept and principle of how internal combustion engines work, is they take chemicals and they make rotary torque. And you can do other things so that it's not just rotary, but that's the main avenue that we see with cars and vehicles. There's other ways to make an engine move, but that's the main one. So that's the one I'll talk about. So how this works, and you've probably seen a diagram of. You probably have. If you've seen TV, you've probably seen a car commercial at some point, and you've seen a diagram of an engine, because they love showing those off because they look cool. But it's, you have this massive casing, this metal case, and inside this sealed metal case, there's a ton of components. And the process, we'll start with the fuel line. So fuel goes in. It comes from your gas tank, if you're using gas. If you're using diesel, it's a little bit different. Internal combustion in a diesel engine is mildly different. I'll explain the nuanced differences as we go. But it's a little different. Just take my word for that. You have a fuel line. Fuel line provides fuel. Where does the fuel come from? That's up to you. What kind of fuel? That is not up to you. That is up to the engine. Different engines require different types of fuels, but let's use gasoline as the example because it is the most common and ubiquitous example. Gasoline. Gasoline is your fuel. Gasoline itself is a fuel because it has a huge, relatively speaking, huge amount of potential kinetic or chemical energy stored in its bonds that with the right reaction explode in an endothermic, with the right conditions explode endothermically and release a lot of energy very quickly. Now, you might have seen octane ratings before in gasoline, and I'm explaining gas because it's crucial to engines. But octane is a hydrocarbon. It has 8. That's where the octo comes from, and it octane. There's like ethane is another ane. Propane. There's different molecules, and they all have different names. So you have like benzene, which is a ring of hydrocarbons, but I'm not going to get too into the chemistry of it. But just know that octane has a bunch of hydrocarbons on it in the shape, well, 8 of them. It's in the general shape of a ring. And fuel has a purity percentage to it based on what's the octane level, how much octane is there in the fuel, how much combustible stuff is there in the stuff we're trying to combust. That's what octanes, the rating is for in normal standard gasoline. And with enough heat or pressure or other ways to break bonds, but usually heat and pressure, how they do it, you can ignite octane. You can ignite gasoline. And when you ignite it, it breaks its bonds apart. It forms carbon dioxide and water vapor, as does any reaction that is with a hydrocarbon typically. Your byproducts are pretty much any combustion. That's the differentiation. There are other reactions that are non-combustive, but combustion reactions always produce CO2 and H2O at a minimum as their byproducts. And I say as a minimum because gasoline, for example, you might have seen the tag unleaded or unleaded. Gasoline used to, because of the mining, fracking, and drilling process, and the refining process, there used to be lead in gasoline. And the reason for that is it's a great way to hold the molecules together and get more potential energy because of the nature of lead in those chemical bonds. But it's really bad for the environment because you're puffing out lead. It's also toxic. So unleaded gasoline is something, I think it's in the 60s or 70s they took it out. They took the lead out of gas. But that was a change that was made that is still, you see it on the stickers today. And the gas no longer has lead in it. At least it shouldn't. It shouldn't. Anyway, so this fuel line goes into your engine. Where in the engine? Well, that depends on the type of engine. So there's older engines have things known as carburetors. Newer engines have fuel injection, and then if it's a diesel engine, it's usually fuel injected, but in a different way. So carburetors, let's talk about that because that's easiest to explain. Carburetors is you take the fuel and you take incoming air and you mix them together before it goes into the engine. So there's a bunch of filters on here, but you pull in incoming air and you vaporize using pressure drops, I believe, the fuel line. So that your fuel is now a vapor, it is a gas, gasoline becomes a gas, you mix it with air, so it is primed and ready, it has the oxygen it needs to combust, but you don't want it combusting in the carburetor, because that will catch your car on fire in not a fun way. So, you then pass that oxygenated, carbureted air, I wonder if carbon comes into the mix here. I wonder. Anyway, I don't think it does, because it just pulls in intake air. There shouldn't be any carbonization going on in the carburetor. It's also spelled differently. It's like, it's not carbon with an O, carburetor. Anyway, that's a tangent. But that air is then passed, that air-fuel mixture is then passed into the combustion chamber using a set of valves and well-timed mechanisms. And if you have fuel injection, instead, that fuel in liquid form is shot into the combustion chamber. And air is brought in a different series, so you don't have mixture in the carburetor, you have mixture in the combustion chamber. Anyway, so all that's brought together, and there's different combustion engines have different strokes, is what they're called. The most common is 4-stroke and 2-stroke. It's what that means is it's the motion that the engine actually undergoes in its shape, like in the physical shape of the engine as it's moving. What's the mechanism? So 2-stroke has an up and a down cycle, right? You put stuff in, it explodes, it pushes the piston down, stuff gets vented. 2 strokes. 4-stroke, you put stuff in, that valve closes, it goes down, you put some more, it compresses it, as it goes back up, another valve opens when it comes back down, it lets more stuff in, and then it comes back for a second strike, and it explodes on that second strike, or 4th strike, really. That is it's a second strike, the 4th motion. That is a 4-stroke engine. And the venting process happens in between this as well, usually, or during this. Okay. That's what I should say, is stuff comes in one of the strokes, stuff goes out in the other stroke, in 4-stroke. In 2-stroke, it's weird, it's like carried with it, like it'll combust it and then pull it down, and then it goes down as the other stuff is being shot in. Anyway, how the mechanism works is you have this thing called a piston, and it's a metal block, it has a piston head, and that metal block takes the brunt of an explosion. So when your piston is moving, which your starter starts the whole process, it's an electric motor, but when the piston is moving, it is moving in reaction to an explosion happening, forcing its motion downward. We'll say down. It can be any direction. We'll say down for simplicity's sake. Forcing the motion downward. That explosion is forceful, and that piston transfers that force into something known as a camshaft in typical combustion engines. A camshaft it's a very weird looking metallic, I can't even call it a rod. It's a part that connects to a bunch of pistons but at offset angles from each other, and has a central axial symmetry that it transfers force through. It's a very strong part, but if it breaks, it screws up your entire engine. And what this part does is it takes all the forces from all these pistons firing at different times and adds their forces together. It takes that linear force of a piston moving up and down in its combustion chamber, and it turns that force into a rotary force. And it does this by the pistons being offset from the center of rotation. So imagine, let's see, what would be a good analogy? Imagine, you ever have a pinwheel, like one of those old kid pinwheels you blow on, that you can hold in your hand or run around and it'll start moving? That's kind of how it works, and how you can think of it is the piston pushes on the outermost edge of that pinwheel's fan, and when it does that, it spins it. If you took your finger and spun it, that's how you do it. You You take your finger, you spin the outside. And the whole thing will turn because of that. But the way you spin it, if you pushed it straight down with your finger, you have a linear motion, a straight line motion with your finger going down, but yet the whole pinwheel spins in rotation. So that's how a camshaft works. It takes that motion and makes it, that linear motion, and makes it rotary. So then there's more to an engine than the camshaft, because then we get into transmissions and stuff and the forces. And there is more to an engine than just this basic process. How the fuel ignites is a big process. So that's the difference, the main difference between diesel and gasoline engines is the ignition process. So in a gasoline engine, you have something known as a spark plug, which is typically iridium-tipped arc, or not arc. Well, it makes an arc, but it's a iridium-tipped piece of metal that your computer in your car runs an electrical current through in a very precise timing, which ignites the air-fuel mixture in your combustion chamber. That's what actually starts the reaction. What gets it going is something known as a spark plug, and it's this little, like, I don't know, it's like the size of your thumb maybe, and it sticks into each combustion chamber. There's a one for each one. It's a pretty simple part. It's a fuse that is made to take a lot of heat, be very durable, and transfer electricity at a high enough voltage to arc it and start a reaction. Because anything that electricity arcing typically is very hot. Typically. You can have very low currents and high voltages and it won't be as hot. This is a high current, high voltage use case, relatively speaking. And not like crazy, but the amount of electricity, the amount of electrons you're pumping through a gap, it's not a vacuum, but open air in a short amount of time is pretty intense. So that's why they use iridium, typically. It's a very strong, lightweight, durable metal, and that's pretty rare. That's why that's the main cost of why this little electrical fuse costs so much, is they use iridium. And I'm trying to think, other use cases for iridium are in medical needles, actually. Because if you ever think about it, like a really small medical needle, how the heck do they get a piece of metal that, skinny, and then also make it hollow, and then also make it strong enough to, go in your body without breaking, without snapping in half, So they use iridium because it's incredibly strong, and incredibly, they can make it ductile enough they can shape it into stuff like needles and spark plugs. I don't like needles, so I'm going to stop talking about that. And shots. Anyway, so this combustion happens because of a spark plug in your engine that's controlled by a computer and powered by your battery, which your battery is powered by your alternator. And I'll get to that too. That's coming. But anyway, so in a diesel engine, there's a difference. Diesel engines, I do not believe, have spark plugs. Instead, they use compression to ignite the fuel. That's why diesel engines typically run hotter as well, and can provide more torque. Is because their reaction is more forceful, if that makes sense. So any gas, or anything, but any piece of matter, it has a temperature, it has a density, it has a volume, which is the inverse of density, and a pressure. And those things vary with regards to each other. In gases, you get much more variance, and solids not as much. And fluids are somewhere in between, depending if they're compressible or not. Liquids, I mean, not fluids. Fluids also count as gases. But you're not using solid fuel in your combustion or diesel engines. So you are using fluids. Anyway, how diesel engines work is you shoot this fuel-air mixture in, and the piston, as it goes up and down in its shaft, in a gasoline engine, it normally compresses the fuel-air mixture, makes it more dense, which helps it ignite. In a diesel engine, you just take that property of the compression and you turn it up to the max. Like you tweak it in such a way that you are able to create tremendous pressures in an instant, in a very instantaneous process. And these tremendous pressures, when you take any volume of something and you compress it, you make it take up less volume but the same amount of stuff. The temperature the amount of heat in the thing is the same, but the temperature increases because of how heat and temperature work. Temperature is the average measure of kinetic energy of something. Heat is how much thermal energy it has. It has the same amount of thermal energy, except for you're getting a little bit of addition to heat because there's work being done on it. But the temperature goes from more sporadic to all of a sudden bundled up in this one little bit of space. And because it's so hot, the bonds break in the fuel and it ignites itself just from pressure, from temperature and pressure. And that's how diesel engines work, is how they create this downward force. Anyway, so the camshaft transfers energy all around your car. It transfers it to a chain it's called a timing chain that keeps it in time with the whole burning and releasing process. It transfers it to a belt, which powers your alternator, which powers your battery, generates electricity. It's just a DC motor and reverse. And it also powers your car, powers your wheels. Stuff goes to transmission, if it has a transmission, usually it does, and then that force gets transferred around to your wheels, and you get to move forward. So that's how it works in a car, typically speaking. There are other use cases for combustion engines. Anytime you just need rotary work that's powerful, more so than an electric motor, you typically can scale an engine more so than you can scale a motor, because you just add more fuel and more air and just make it bigger. Like, it'll work. Or you chain them together too and can add their torques, but you need more gearing for that. Anyway, that is internal combustion engines and how they work at a very top level. You could dive into the specifics, and there are more parts to it that I have not included. Like talk about exhausts and where those go, or talking about, I don't know, O-rings and such, which help make seals on the engines, and the list goes on. There's plenty to an engine. But that's the process. That's the main way how they work. So I hope this was useful and practical, and that it was a good use of 20 minutes of your time. I'm going to go pick up cheesesteaks. So, goodbye.